In the autumn of 1983, the leaf-strewn streets of Chevy Chase, Maryland, projected an image of perfect American stability. It was a neighborhood of brick colonials, manicured lawns, and Volvo station wagons, the kind of place where government officials and lawyers raised their families in quiet comfort, insulated from the geopolitical storms they managed during the workday. At the center of this picture stood Thomas Vance. To his neighbors, Vance was the ideal community member. He was 52 years old, with salt and pepper hair and a demeanor of calm, professional competence. He mowed his lawn on Saturday mornings, attended the local Episcopalian church on Sundays, and hosted barbecues where he spoke knowledgeably, but never indiscreetly, about the state of the world. To the United States government, Thomas Vance was a critical asset. He served as a deputy chief of logistics for the Naval Sea Systems Command. It was not a glamorous job. He wasn't a spy hunter or a diplomat making headlines. Instead, he was a man of logistics, supply chains, and procurement. He knew where the acoustic sensors for the new class of attack submarines were being manufactured. He knew the delivery schedules for the guidance chips used in the Trident missile systems. He knew the precise movement of the Atlantic Fleet's support vessels. In the chessboard of the Cold War, he was not a knight or a bishop, but he was the man who knew exactly where every piece was standing. But Thomas Vance did not exist. The man living in the brick house on Primrose Street, the man kissing his wife Eleanor goodbye every morning, was a fiction. He was a construct, a legend, built over 3 decades of patient, meticulous tradecraft. His real name was Viktor Volkov, born in a frantic hospital in Sverdlovsk in 1931. He had been a child of the Soviet state, selected for his linguistic aptitude and his nondescript features, trained by the KGB's Directorate S, the illegals program, to become more American than the Americans. The infiltration had been flawless. The real Thomas Vance had been a lonely, drifting student who had died in a hiking accident in the Swiss Alps in 1954, a tragedy that went largely unreported in the United States. The KGB had intercepted the death notification, and Volkov had stepped into the dead man's life. He had returned to the U.S. using Vance's passport, finished his education, and slowly, painstakingly, built a career in the defense sector. For 29 years, Volkov had lived inside the skin of Thomas Vance. He had married an American woman who had no idea who he was. He had raised 2 children, Sarah and Mark, who pledged allegiance to the flag at school, while their father quietly photographed documents that would help destroy the republic for which it stood. By 1983, Vance felt untouchable. He had passed background checks in 1960, 1968, and 1975. The polygraphs had been conquered through years of psychological conditioning. The FBI had no file on him. The CIA didn't know his name. He was a ghost in the machine, a perfect spy who had forgotten what it felt like to be afraid. But the nature of intelligence work is that the past is never truly buried. It is merely archived. And in the basement of a federal building in Langley, Virginia, a young analyst named Elias Thorne was about to pull a thread that would unravel the entire tapestry of Vance's life. Thorne was not a field agent. He didn't carry a gun or meet sources in dark alleys. He was a genealogist of bureaucracy, a man who found comfort in the rigid order of paperwork. He worked in the Office of Security's Research Branch, a department often looked down upon by the dashing case officers of the clandestine service. His job was to retroactively vet personnel who were being considered for Yankee White clearance, the highest level of security access required for those working directly with White House military communications. Thomas Vance had recently been recommended for a promotion that would place him on the National Security Council's Logistics Advisory Board. It was a position that required Yankee White access. And so his file landed on Elias Thorne's desk on a rainy Tuesday morning in November. Thorne opened the dossier. It was thick, filled with commendations, performance reviews, and tax returns. It was the biography of a model citizen. But Thorne had a habit, bordering on a compulsion, of verifying the foundational documents of a subject's life. Most analysts checked the criminal record and the credit score. Thorne liked to look at the beginning. He looked at the section of the file detailing Vance's education. University of Wisconsin-Madison, Bachelor of Science in Engineering, class of 1954. It was a standard entry. The diploma was there, a photocopy of the original. The transcript was there, showing a solid B-average student. But something about the timeline caught Thorne's eye. The transcript showed a gap in the spring semester of 1953. The explanation in the file was medical leave, mononucleosis. It was a plausible excuse, but Thorne noticed that in the subsequent semester, fall of 1953, Vance's grades had improved dramatically. He had gone from a C student in calculus to an A student in advanced thermodynamics. It was the kind of academic turnaround that usually signaled a newfound discipline or a change in study habits. Thorne tapped his pen against the desk. It wasn't evidence of espionage. It wasn't even evidence of a lie. But it was a curiosity, and Elias Thorne did not like curiosities. He liked patterns. He decided to make a phone call, not to the FBI, not to his superiors, but to the registrar's office at the University of Wisconsin. He wanted to verify the medical leave. It was a small, nagging itch in the back of his mind, the instinct of a man who spent his life looking for cracks in the pavement. He didn't know it yet, but that phone call was the first strike of the pickaxe against the wall of Thomas Vance's life. The man in Chevy Chase was eating dinner with his family, discussing his son's college applications, completely unaware that in a basement in Virginia, the clock had just started ticking. Chapter 2: The Badger State Anomalies. The University of Wisconsin in the 1950s was a sprawling institution, a place where thousands of students moved through the lecture halls and dormitories, many of them disappearing into the anonymity of the crowd. Finding traces of a student from 30 years prior was a task that required patience and physical labor. Elias Thorne flew to Madison 3 days after reviewing the file. He had told his supervisor he was following up on an administrative discrepancy, a phrase dry enough to discourage further questions. He arrived in a city that was gray and bitten by the early winter winds coming off the lakes. The university archives were located in the basement of the Steenbach Library, a place that smelled of dust, aging paper, and binding glue. The archivist was a woman named Mrs. Galloway, who viewed Thorne's federal credentials with a mixture of suspicion and boredom. She pointed him toward the rows of metal filing cabinets that held the physical records of the graduating classes of the mid-1950s. Thorne spent the first day going through the official academic records. He found the original copy of Thomas Vance's transcript. The ink was fading, but legible. The gap in the spring of 1953 was there, just as the file said. Medical withdrawal was stamped in red ink. But as Thorne turned the pages of the student folder, he noticed something missing. In the 1950s, the university required students to have a faculty advisor sign off on their course loads every semester. For the years 1951 and 1952, the signature was there, a scrawl belonging to a Professor H. Miller. But for the fall of 1953, the semester Vance returned from his illness. The signature was different. It was signed by a teaching assistant. Again, it was minor. Professors went on sabbatical. Students slipped through the cracks. But coupled with the grade improvement, it painted a picture of a student who had returned from a serious illness as a different academic animal. Thorne decided to look for a more human connection. He asked Mrs. Galloway for the yearbooks. The 1954 Badger yearbook was a heavy, leather-bound volume. Thorne took it to a wooden table under the humming fluorescent lights. He turned the pages, scanning the rows of young faces, men in crew cuts and ties, women in pearls and sweaters, the optimism of the post-war era captured in black and white. He found the engineering section. There was Thomas Vance. The photo showed a young man with a thin face, light eyes, and ears that stuck out slightly. He was looking away from the camera, his expression serious. Thorne took a magnifying glass from his kit and studied the grain of the photo. He compared it to the ID photo currently in Vance's security file, taken just last year. The man in the file was 52. The man in the yearbook was 22. 30 years of aging changes a face. Hairlines recede, jaws soften, skin sags. But the ears looked similar. The eyes were the same shape. Thorne sat back, rubbing his temples. It was him. The man in the yearbook was the man in the Pentagon. The theory of an imposter seemed to evaporate. If the Soviets had replaced Vance, they must have done it before 1954, before he graduated. But that didn't make sense. Why replace a student? Sleeper agents were usually inserted as adults, or they were grown from a young age. If Victor Volkov had taken Vance's place, he had to have done it during the college years. Thorne went back to the transcript. The gap. Spring 1953. He decided to look for candid photos. Yearbook staffs often took thousands of pictures that didn't make the final cut, storing them in discard boxes or contact sheet archives. Do you have the negatives, or the contact sheets from the photography club from that year? Thorne asked. Mrs. Galloway sighed. That would be in the deep storage. We haven't digitized any of that. It's just boxes of envelopes. I have time, Thorne said. He spent the next 2 days sifting through thousands of negatives. He was looking for anything that showed the engineering department, the dorms where Vance had lived, or social events. It was on the afternoon of the third day that he found the first discrepancy. It wasn't a photo of Vance, it was a photo of the engineering club, dated October 1952, before the medical leave. Thorne found the name Vance T listed in the caption on the back of the print. He counted the heads. Third row, second from the left. He looked at the face. It was a young man. He had the same general build as the yearbook photo. But when Thorne used the magnifying glass, his heart skipped a beat. The man in the 1952 engineering club photo had a distinct scar on his chin, a jagged line that caught the light of the flash. Thorne pulled out the current Pentagon file photo. He pulled out the 1954 yearbook photo. Neither the current Thomas Vance nor the 1954 Thomas Vance had a scar on his chin. Thorne felt a cold sweat prickle on his neck. He was looking at two different men. The man who attended the university in 1951 and 1952. The man with the scar was the real Thomas Vance. The man who graduated in 1954. The man in the official yearbook and the man currently working for the U.S. Navy was an imposter. The switch had happened during the medical leave. The real Vance had left, perhaps truly sick, or perhaps he had gone traveling, and he had never come back. The Soviet agent had stepped in, retook the classes in the fall of 1953, and because it was a large university and he was a quiet student, no one had noticed that the Thomas Vance who returned was a different person. But Thorne needed more than a grainy club photo. Shadows and light could play tricks. A scar could be makeup or a printing error. He needed definitive proof. He needed the graduation photograph. Chapter 3. The graduation photograph. The university held its graduation ceremony in the Camp Randall Stadium. It was a massive affair. Thorne knew that official photographers would have taken a panoramic shot of the graduating class, as well as individual shots of students receiving their diplomas. He asked Mrs. Galloway for the ceremonial archives. 1954 commencement, she muttered, leading him to a different aisle. Box 402. Thorne opened the box. Inside were stacks of 8EX10 glossy prints. He began sorting them. He found the engineering cohort. He found a picture of the dean shaking hands with students. He flipped through them rapidly. Smith, Thompson, Turner, Vance. He stopped. The photograph captured the moment Thomas Vance received his diploma. The camera was positioned at the side of the stage, offering a clear profile view. The student was smiling, shaking the dean's hand. Thorne pulled out the 1952 engineering club photo again. The man with the scar, 1952, had a distinctive earlobe, attached, flush against the jawline. The man on the stage, 1954, had a detached earlobe. Ear biometrics were unique. They didn't change with age. They didn't change with weight gain. You could alter a nose with surgery. You could dye hair. You could change eye color with contact lenses, though not in 1954. But ears were the fingerprints of the face. Thorne laid the three images side by side on the dusty table. 1952. The real Thomas Vance. Attached earlobes. Scar on chin. 1954. The imposter. Detached earlobes. No scar. 1983. The senior Navy logistical officer. Detached earlobes. No scar. The man in the Pentagon was the man who graduated in 1954. But he was not the man who started the degree. The narrative constructed itself in Thorne's mind. The KGB must have identified Vance as a target, perhaps while he was traveling in Europe during his medical leave. The real Vance was eliminated or imprisoned. The imposter, Volkov, assumed his identity. He returned to the university, finished the degree to establish his credentials in the US, and then began his long, slow climb into the defense establishment. It was a staggering realization. This wasn't just a spy, this was a deep cover operative who had successfully fooled the entire American security apparatus for 30 years. He had raised American children. He had voted in American elections. He was, for all intents and purposes, an American citizen, except for the secret allegiance he held in his heart. Thorne carefully placed the photographs into evidence envelopes. He didn't trust the checked luggage. He would carry them in his briefcase, handcuffed to his wrist if he had to. He left the library and walked out into the Madison twilight. The world looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Students rushing to class, cars splashing through puddles. But for Elias Thorne, the reality of his country had fundamentally shifted. The enemy wasn't just at the gates. The enemy had been sitting at the dinner table for 3 decades. Chapter 4. The Quiet Alarm. Returning to Langley, Thorne faced the most dangerous part of the investigation, the internal politics. Accusing a senior Pentagon official of being a Soviet illegal based on earlobes in a 30-year-old photograph was a career-ending move if he was wrong. Even if he was right, the implications were so massive that the agency's immune system might reject the information to protect its own reputation. Thorne bypassed his immediate supervisor, a man named Henderson who was known for burying difficult files. Instead, he went to the director of counterintelligence, a legendary figure named Marcus Sterling. Sterling was a man of few words and perpetual cigarette smoke. He listened to Thorne's presentation in silence, studying the photographs spread out on his mahogany desk. "You're telling me," Sterling rumbled, his voice like gravel, "that the deputy chief of logistics for Sea Systems is a Russian. I'm saying the man in that office is not the man who enrolled in the University of Wisconsin in 1950, Thorne corrected. And given his access to submarine acoustics and missile guidance delivery systems, the most logical conclusion is that he is an adversarial agent. Sterling picked up the 1954 graduation photo. "Ears," he muttered. "It always comes down to the damn ears." He looked up at Thorne. "If you are wrong, Elias, you will be checking security clearances for the sanitation department in Nome, Alaska. If you are right, God help us all." Sterling authorized a preliminary inquiry, but he attached strict conditions. No FBI involvement yet. No alerts to the Navy. This was to be a blue-on-blue investigation, CIA internal assets only, until they had confirmation of active espionage. They couldn't risk Vance spotting a clumsy FBI surveillance team and running. If he was a Directorate S illegal, he would have escape routes and contingency plans that had been dormant for decades. They assigned a special surveillance group, SSG team, to Vance. The code name for the operation was Glass Mirror. The surveillance began on December 2, 1983. The team established a listening post in a utility van parked 2 streets over from Vance's home on Primrose Street. They tapped his phone lines, not at the house where he might check for bugs, but at the junction box a mile away. They placed transponders on his Volvo and his wife's station wagon. For the first 2 weeks, they saw nothing but the excruciating boredom of a perfect life. Vance went to work at 7:30 a.m. He sat in traffic. He arrived at the Naval Yard. He attended meetings about hull alloys and propulsion schedules. He ate a tuna sandwich at his desk. He left at 5:30 p.m. He went home. He helped his daughter Sarah with her algebra. He watched the evening news. He went to bed. "He's boring." The lead surveillance officer, a man named Kowalski, complained to Thorne during a debriefing. "He's the most boring man in America. If he's a spy, his cover is that he bores us to death." "That's the point," Thorne insisted. "He's been doing this for 30 years. He doesn't make mistakes because he doesn't take risks, but he has to communicate. He has to get the information to Moscow. He's in logistics. He knows the value of data flow. Look for the gaps." Thorne spent his nights listening to the tapes of Vance's phone calls. They were banal. Discussions about grocery lists, Christmas plans, car repairs. But Thorne listened to the tone, the pauses. Then, on December 18th, a Sunday, a pattern emerged. Every Sunday, Vance went to buy a bagel and a copy of the Washington Post at a specific deli in Bethesda. It was a ritual. But on this specific Sunday, the surveillance log noted that Vance parked in a different spot than usual. 3 blocks away in front of a fire hydrant. He walked to the deli, bought his paper and bagel, and walked back. But on the return trip, he paused for approximately 4 seconds by a seemingly random telephone pole on Elm Street. He adjusted his shoe as if tying a lace. The surveillance team didn't see him drop anything. They didn't see him pick anything up. But later that afternoon, a blue Ford sedan with diplomatic plates registered to the Soviet embassy drove past that same telephone pole. The car didn't stop. It just slowed down slightly. Thorne reviewed the footage from the pole camera the team had installed days earlier. When Vance bent down to tie his shoe, his hand brushed against the lower wood of the pole. A tiny, almost invisible mark of white chalk appeared. It was a signal, a sign of life. It told the handler, "I have something. Get ready." "He's active," Thorne whispered to the empty room. "He's not just a sleeper, he's awake." Chapter 5. The Dead Drop. The chalk mark set off a chain reaction at Langley. The evidence was no longer historical, it was operational. Sterling authorized a full-scale surveillance net. They needed to catch him in the act of transmission. The team analyzed Vance's movements for the upcoming week. Tuesday was his wife's bridge night. Thursday was his late night at the office. On Tuesday, December 20th, Vance left work at the usual time. But instead of turning onto the Beltway toward home, he drove into the city. He parked near the National Zoo. He entered the zoo grounds. It was late afternoon, the winter light fading fast. The zoo was closing soon, the crowds thinning. Vance walked past the elephant enclosure, his hands in his pockets. He looked like a man killing time. He stopped at a retaining wall near the reptile house. He placed a crushed soda can on the ledge of the wall. It looked like litter. He walked away. 10 minutes later, he was back in his car, driving home. The surveillance team was frantic. Did he leave it? Was the can the drop? "Don't touch it," Thorne ordered over the comms. "Wait for the pickup." They waited. The zoo closed. Darkness fell. The crushed soda can sat on the wall, an innocuous piece of trash. At 8:15 p.m., a man in a jogger's tracksuit entered the park through a service entrance. He ran past the reptile house, slowed his pace, snatched the can without breaking stride, and continued running into the darkness of Rock Creek Park. The team tracked the jogger. He ran 2 miles, exited the park, and got into a car registered to a known KGB intelligence officer, Yuri Karpov. "We have him," Kowalski said. "Transfer of material." "Not yet," Thorne said. "We saw him pick up a can. We don't know what was in it. A good lawyer could argue it was just littering. We need the contents. We need to know what Vance is giving them." They had missed the chance to intercept the package, but now they knew the method. Vance used concealment devices. The soda can likely had a false bottom containing microfilm or encrypted SD cards, which didn't exist yet, so microdots or one-time pads. Thorne realized that Vance was likely clearing his backlog of intelligence before the holidays. The Naval Sea Systems Command had just finalized the specifications for the new torpedo propulsors. That information would be worth millions to the Soviet Navy. It would allow them to build countermeasures before the American torpedoes were even in the water. Thorne looked at the calendar. Christmas was 5 days away. Vance would likely try one more drop to clear his safe before the family festivities began. "We need to get into his house," Thorne said. "We need to find where he makes the copies." Chapter 6. The dark room. Getting into the house of a trained illegal was a nightmare scenario. If Vance had set traps, hairs across door frames, dust patterns on the floor, he would know instantly, but they had a window. On December 23rd, the Vance family was scheduled to attend a 3-hour performance of the Nutcracker. The moment the Volvo pulled out of the driveway, the entry team moved in. They picked the lock on the back door with surgical precision. They wore Tyvek suits to prevent leaving fibers or DNA. They moved through the silent house like ghosts. Thorne monitored from the van. "Basement. Check the hobby areas." Vance had a workshop in the basement. He built model ships, a fitting hobby for a naval logistics officer, and a perfect cover for meticulous handiwork. The team scanned the room. They checked the hollow bases of the model ships. Nothing. They checked the paint cans. Nothing. 2 minutes, the lookout warned. "Traffic is light. They might be early." "Check the floor," Thorne said. "Check the shelving units." One of the agents noticed that the heavy workbench was bolted to the floor. but the bolts looked scratched, as if they had been turned recently. "The leg of the bench," the agent whispered. He unscrewed the bottom cap of the metal leg. It was hollow. Inside, he found a tightly rolled tube of mylar. "Jackpot," the agent said. "Photograph it and put it back," Thorne ordered. "Do not take it. We need him to think he's safe." The agent carefully extracted the documents. He used a high-speed camera to capture the pages. They were technical schematics for the Mark 48 ADCAP torpedo, classified top secret, no foreign. The agent replaced the mylar, screwed the cap back on, and dusted the area to remove any prints. The team exited the house 4 minutes before the Vance family pulled into the driveway. Thorne sat in the van, reviewing the images. It was damnable evidence, treason in high definition. But as he looked at the pictures, he felt a strange heaviness. He thought about the graduation photo. He thought about the real Thomas Vance, dead in a ravine in Switzerland, his life stolen so that this man could steal secrets. "He's not just stealing plans," Thorne murmured. "He stole a soul." Chapter 7. The Christmas Party. The arrest was set for December 27th. They wanted to wait until Christmas was over, a small mercy for the innocent wife and children, or perhaps a strategic delay to let Vance lower his guard further. On Christmas Eve, the surveillance team watched as the Vance house filled with guests. Neighbors, colleagues from the Navy, even the local pastor. Thorne watched through the long-range lens. He saw Vance laughing, holding a glass of eggnog. He saw him kiss his wife under the mistletoe. He saw him give his son, Mark, a set of car keys, a new car for the college boy. It was a perfect American Christmas. And it was all a lie. Thorne found himself wondering if Vance loved them. Did the spy love the family he had built as cover? Or were they just props, assets to be managed like the torpedo schematics? The psychology of the illegal was a labyrinth. To survive 30 years, you had to compartmentalize. You had to be two people. But eventually the mask eats the face. Thorne suspected that Viktor Volkov had forgotten where the spy ended and the father began. On the morning of the 26th, Vance went into his basement. The audio bugs picked up the sound of metal on metal, the workbench leg being unscrewed. "He's retrieving the package," Kowalski said. "He's going to move it." The drop was scheduled for the next morning. The location was a dead drop site in Great Falls Park, a rugged area along the Potomac River. Thorne briefed the takedown team. "We take him at the drop site. Once the package leaves his hand, we need the chain of custody." "What about the handler?" Sterling asked. "The FBI will take the handler," Thorne said. "Our priority is Vance." Chapter 8. Great Falls. December 27th dawned cold and gray, a biting wind whipping down the Potomac River gorge. The water of the falls churned violently, a roar that drowned out the sound of footsteps on the trails. Vance arrived at the park at 2 a.m. He was dressed in hiking gear, looking like any other retiree getting some morning exercise. He carried a walking stick. The FBI and CIA teams were hidden in the brush, shivering in the cold. Thorne was in the command vehicle at the park entrance. Vance walked the river trail. He stopped at a rocky outcrop known as Mather Gorge. He looked around. He pretended to admire the view. He knelt down, ostensibly to retie his boot, his favorite move. He slid a rock aside and placed a small, waterproof container into the crevice. He replaced the rock. "Package is down," the spotter radioed. Vance stood up. He took a deep breath of the cold air. For a moment, he looked peaceful. "Move in," Thorne said. 6 agents emerged from the tree line. They didn't run. They walked with purpose. They wore FBI windbreakers. "Thomas Vance!" the lead agent shouted. "Federal agents, stay where you are!" Vance turned. He didn't run. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't look surprised. He looked tired. He leaned on his walking stick and watched them come. As they surrounded him, he looked toward the river, toward the rushing water that separated Maryland from Virginia, a natural border in a land that wasn't his. "Mr. Vance," the agent said, handcuffing him, "you are under arrest for espionage against the United States." Vance said nothing. He allowed himself to be led away, leaving the view of the falls behind. Chapter 9. The Interrogation. The interrogation took place in a safe house in Alexandria, not at the Hoover Building or Langley. They wanted isolation. Thorne asked to be the one to conduct the initial interview. Sterling agreed. Vance sat at a metal table. He had been stripped of his belt and shoelaces. He sat with his hands folded, his posture perfect. He looked like a man waiting for a board meeting to start. Thorne walked in. He carried a manila folder. He sat down opposite Vance. "My name is Elias Thorne. I work for the Central Intelligence Agency." Vance nodded politely. "I'm afraid there's been a terrible mistake, Mr. Thorne. I am a loyal employee of the Department of the Navy. I demand to speak to my lawyer. We know about the dead drop, Thomas. We have the torpedo plans. I was hiking. I found a container. I was examining it. I was framed." His denial was automatic, smooth, the voice of a man who had practiced this conversation in his head for 1,000 nights. Thorne didn't argue. He opened the folder. He took out the 1952 Engineering Club photo. He slid it across the table. "This is Thomas Vance in 1952, Thorne said. "Notice the scar on the chin?" Vance looked at the photo. His expression didn't change. Thorne took out the 1954 graduation photo. He slid it next to the first one. "This is Thomas Vance in 1954. No scar, and the ears, the lobes are detached." Vance's eyes flickered. Just a micro expression, a twitch of the eyelid. Thorne leaned forward. "We know you aren't Thomas Vance. We know Thomas Vance died in Europe in 1953 or 1954. We know you are an imposter." Vance stared at the photos. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. "We don't know your real name," Thorne said softly. "Is it Victor? Alexei? Dmitri?" Vance looked up. The mask finally slipped. The eyes that met Thorne's weren't the eyes of a suburban dad anymore. They were cold, hard, and incredibly old. "It doesn't matter who I was," Vance said, his voice losing the affected mid-Atlantic accent, dropping into a slightly deeper, flatter register. "I have been Thomas Vance longer than he was. You lived a lie for 30 years. I lived a life," Vance corrected. "I did my job. I raised my children. I paid my taxes. And you gave the Soviets the guidance systems for the Trident missile." Vance shrugged. "Balance of power, Mr. Thorne. Stability requires parity. If one side is too strong, the world burns. I was a peacemaker." "Tell that to your wife," Thorne said. "Tell that to Sarah and Mark." For the first time, Vance flinched. The mention of the children hit the target. "They are innocent," Vance said, his voice straining. "They knew nothing. Eleanor knew nothing. If you touch them, we won't touch them," Thorne said. "But you have destroyed them just the same. When they find out who you are, that is the punishment you can't escape." Chapter 10. The Collapse of the Fiction. The arrest of Thomas Vance, or the man who called himself that, sent shockwaves through the intelligence community. The damage assessment was catastrophic. For 10 years, the Soviets had been reading the U.S. Navy's logistical playbook in real time. But the human toll was playing out on Primrose Street. The FBI raided the house an hour after the arrest. Eleanor Vance collapsed in the hallway when they told her. She couldn't process the words. Espionage. Imposter. Soviet agent. It was like being told the sky was made of lead. It defied the laws of her reality. Sarah came home from her job at a law firm to find agents tearing apart the walls of her childhood home. Mark was pulled out of his college dorm in Virginia. They were brought to a hotel for debriefing. They sat in a room, stunned, while agents asked them questions about their father's habits, his travel, his friends. "He's my dad," Mark kept saying, over and over. "He taught me to play baseball. He's just my dad." Thorne watched the interviews from behind the glass. This was the collateral damage of the Cold War. It wasn't just soldiers dying in proxy wars. It was families disintegrated by lies. The FBI eventually identified the spy as Viktor Volkov. They found a microdot in a hollowed-out coin in his safety deposit box that contained a message from his mother in Sverdlovsk, dated 1965. It was the only piece of his real life he had kept. A sentimental error. Chapter 11. The Trial and the Silence. Volkov never went to trial. The U.S. government couldn't risk a public spectacle that would reveal the extent of the security breach. They couldn't admit that a Soviet spy had reached the upper echelons of the Pentagon for a decade. Instead, a deal was cut. Volkov would be debriefed. He would tell them everything, every document he stole, every network he knew, every tradecraft secret. In exchange, the government would not prosecute his wife or children for conspiracy. Though there was no evidence they were involved, the threat was enough to ensure cooperation. And he would avoid the death penalty. The debriefing lasted 2 years. Volkov was a font of information. He described the KGB's illegal program in terrifying detail. He explained how they spotted lonely students abroad, how they harvested identities, how they played the long game. He never saw his family again. Eleanor divorced him in absentia. She sold the house on Primrose Street and moved to Arizona, trying to outrun the shame. Sarah changed her last name. Mark dropped out of college and joined the Peace Corps, trying to do something honest in a world that felt fundamentally dishonest. Volkov was eventually transferred to a Supermax facility. In 2010, there were rumors he was part of a spy swap, traded for 2 Western assets held in Russia, but the records were sealed. Chapter 12. The Legacy of a Photograph. Elias Thorne retired in 1998. He had had a successful career, but he never worked a case like the Vance file again. On his last day, he went down to the archives at Langley. He asked to see the file, Glass Mirror. He opened the box. He pulled out the 3 photographs: the 1952 student with the scar, the 1954 graduate with the detached lobes, the 1983 spy. He looked at the graduation photograph. It was just a moment in time, a young man shaking a hand, smiling at a future that wasn't his. It was a picture of a theft. Thorne realized that the Cold War wasn't really about ideologies or economics. It was about identity. It was about the things we project to the world versus the things we hide in the dark. Viktor Volkov had stolen Thomas Vance's life. He had worn it like a suit. But in the end, a piece of photographic paper, a chemical reaction of light and silver halide, had trapped him. The truth, Thorne mused, is the only thing that doesn't age. The ears don't change. The past doesn't change. And eventually, no matter how deep you bury it, the truth graduates. Thorne placed the photos back in the file, closed the box, and walked out of the building into the bright, unambiguous sunlight of the real world.